Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to another book related video. Today I want to talk about all the books that I read so far this year. So I've got all of my books here. I read 12 books so far, so I'm currently reading my 12th book. And so what I want to say is that I'm a rather slow reader. I don't read that fast. I don't get how people can read like 5 books or more books in a month. I read like 2 to at most 3 books a month, which is fine for me. I don't want to rush things, and there are books like what I'm currently reading that I feel like are not meant to be read in a fast pace. So yeah, just to say that I'm very proud of reading like this many books. For me this is a lot. So without further ado, let's just get started. I'm going to show you the books and talk about them in chronological order. So the first book I finished this year, actually started last year, is one that I read in French but is also available in English. There's a translation. So it is Le Restaurant de l'Amour Retrouvé by Ogawa Ito. And in English the title is, I'm looking down because I have my notebook here, is The Restaurant of Love Regained. And so this is about a 25-year-old woman who, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name, but she basically suffers from a breakup and decides, actually kind of has to go back home because she doesn't have any money left, if I remember correctly, and she doesn't have a really good connection and relationship to her mother, but doesn't really have anywhere else to go. And because of the heartbreak she's suffering from, she loses her voice. So throughout the book she doesn't speak but sort of finds a way of communicating through writing with the people around her. So that's a sort of very specific thing about this book that was a little weird sometimes, because it's some more introspective, like her view of things. So she goes back to her hometown and decides to open a little restaurant because there is some space that she can use, and she loves to cook and realises that through her cooking she can bring people back together. So it's a very small space, but she takes reservations from people who will have very specific requests, and so she creates these very specific dinners or lunches for the people to, for families or for lovers. And it's very, it reminded me a little of the books that I read a couple of years last year, I think, the Before the Coffee Gets Cold, because it's really just about this one place where people meet, and Rinko as the cook is the sort of, well, she's not only the observer, but she makes these meetings sort of happen. So it's very rather slow-paced book, and it's more sort of contemplative, and there is a passage towards the end I didn't really like, but overall it's a lovely book to read, and I highly recommend if you liked, for example, Before the Coffee Gets Cold. The next book that I read, or actually listened to as an audiobook, was The World of Downton Abbey by, I think it was written by, Jessica Fellowes. So if you know Downton Abbey, it was written by Julian Fellowes. He's the creator of the show, and this book was written by, I think it's his niece. So this copy here is in German, because I realised I've been watching Downton Abbey for about 10 years, which is like such a long time. I love the show. I really am into these period drama, costume drama. I love this genre, and also because I'm really interested in history. So this book I listened to as an audiobook, and it was read by Elizabeth McGovern, who plays Cora, a Lady Grantham in the series. She's the mum of Lady Mary, Lady Edith and Lady Sybil. And it basically is a book about the historical context and giving information about how the series was created, so behind the scenes information about the costume design and the set design, and it's really interesting. If you like the series and if you're interested in history and the period of time that it's set in, like the early 20th century, it's so good and informative. And So it's really looking at the politics of the time, and so the way of life of this huge estate, you know, Highclere Castle, where it is without an Abbey size. I'd love to see it. So it really explains how this estate, kind of estate, was run and what the life was like for the people living upstairs but also downstairs. So basically, you know, exactly what the show shows in Downton Abbey. Next I listened to another audiobook, which was The Windsor Knot by S.J. Bennet. And this I'd heard about, but I never read anything by this author. And it is a crime fiction book where the Queen is investigating, and it was really good. Actually, I have to be honest, I don't remember much of it, but so there's basically sort of an event at Windsor Castle, and one of the people who were invited is dead. They get killed, and so of course there's an investigation going on, and the Queen, well, behind their back, is investigating herself with the help of her secretary. And so it's really funny to see how the Queen basically sends her private secretary on these little trips to interview people and to find out what really happened, and then you have these moments where the police come to see her and explain what they found and what their current, you know, what the current state of the investigation is, and she just so politely listens and of course doesn't say that she's been investigating as well and really found out all the things that they are reporting. And so it's really well written, and it was lovely to listen to as an audiobook. So yeah, I don't remember much, but I really enjoyed it. It was one of the first books that I read this year, so it's been quite some time, and sometimes I just, honestly, I read and listen to the book and then I forget most of it. I just remember the way it made me feel and, you know, if I liked it or not. But I think I gave it, hold on. So I have this list of books on my phone where I just wrote down the title of the author and which language I read it in. So I have this little flag in front of the title and the stars. So it's a solid 3-star book for me. I'm very like harsh at giving, like I very rarely give 5 stars, so 3 is really good for me. Yeah, so if you're looking for not too sort of brutal and more sort of investigative crime fiction book, then I would highly recommend this one. Next I read If Only They Could Talk by James Herriot, which I read because I recently discovered the new TV adaptation, All Creatures Great and Small. And I really love this cover, and especially I think it's a Macmillan Collectors, what's it called again? Macmillan Collectors Library. It's from the Macmillan Collectors Library. So I really like these editions. They're so beautiful, and if you take this off, you can see, yeah, so you can see that it's really beautiful pattern on the cover and also inside. Oh, I just love it. And honestly, this is what I'd call pocket size. Please, I need more books this size. It's so practical and you can just take it everywhere. And so, as you probably know, I think this is a very well-known TV series and story. James Herriot is actually the pen name for Wright, and it's sort of autobiographical, so it's taken from his own life. He moved to Yorkshire, just recently graduated as a vet, and working there, meeting all of the farmers and discovering the beautiful landscapes and making his own way in the world. And I was surprised, you know, I was thinking, okay, well, this was written in the 1970s, it's already like 50 years old, and I was like, okay, I'm curious to see what the writing style is like, but I really liked it. It was rather easy to read and funny at times with the characters. Secret interest in the two brothers who James Herriot joins in their practice, their veterinary practice, and I really liked it. It's just lovely to see how the characters build this relationship and working with all these animals and the stories behind it, and the lovely, beautiful scenery of it all. It's a lovely read. If you like the series, I totally recommend you read the books that it is based on. And then next I read, or actually again listened to, an audiobook, Go Gently by Bonnie Wright. Actionable Steps to Nurture Yourself and the Planet. So Bonnie Wright, as you may know, played Ginny Weasley in the Harry Potter films, and she wrote this guide about environmental friendly living, and in the beginning she really gives you an introduction to the climate crisis and about the environmental movement and what it's all about, and then she also kind of tells her own story about how she discovered it and how she implemented it into her own daily life. And then there are several chapters that are divided into different spaces in your home, like the kitchen, the bathroom, and then also of course there are recipes, and in every chapter there's also an interview with someone involved in the climate movement, and it's really interesting to see you get different perspectives on the topic, and she really gives very simple, actionable steps. So if you're really rather familiar with things you can do, for example, you know, switching some kind of products in your bathroom, it is a bit redundant, but if you are trying to find a first sort of approach to the topic and trying to find a way to implement some things in your daily life, then it's really, really good. I'm not saying that I didn't learn anything from it, but as I already kind of, you know, did a bit of research on the topic and am interested in it and have been for quite some time, there were some things which were just rather obvious to me but may be new to you. So, and even if you already know quite a bit of things about the climate crisis, I totally recommend. It was really lovely to listen to. She's actually reading it herself, so I'm going to listen to Ginny Weasley talking about the environment. No, but seriously, it's really good and it's well structured, so you can easily follow it. And yeah, so if you're interested in that and want to take steps yourself, I'd recommend you read or listen to this book. The next book that I read is Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and I love reading children's books. So I loved the TV series done when I was a kid, and I was thinking, okay, I might read something in German again for a change. I usually read in English, but German is actually my mother tongue, so and I checked on my phone, as I said before, I have this list on my phone, and I realised that it had been almost 3 years since I last read something in German. So it was actually rather weird at the beginning. It was like, okay, I really wasn't used to it anymore, although I hear German every single day. But I think it's also due to the fact that it's actually rather old. I didn't know, but then reading it, it didn't surprise me. It is from the late 19th century. So as you may know, Heidi is about this 5-year-old girl who's orphaned, sadly, and grows up with her aunt Dita. And when she gets a job in Frankfurt, she decides to bring Heidi to her grandfather, to the Swiss Alps. He is a really sort of grumpy old man, but he grows to love Heidi so much because she's such a cheerful and lively, lovely, caring character. And so you basically follow her story, her growing up in the Swiss Alps. She loves to spend time outside in nature, also with the Peter, the boy who, you know, goes and collects all of the goats from the village and brings them up into the mountains to zum Grasen. See, like there's some words that I don't know. Then one day, Dita, her aunt, decides to bring her to a family in Frankfurt where she lives for a certain amount of time, where she meets also Clara, who is a couple of years older, I think, than her and is very ill, so she doesn't really go outside. But still, Heidi manages to bring some life into her house and to make it much more fun, and she also experiences some kind of small adventures, venturing out into the city and getting lost and then adopting kittens, and it's really funny and heartwarming. And then towards the end, I'm not really spoiling it, am I? If you want to read it, then just skip this passage, but I think everyone, or if you know Heidi, you know the TV adaptation, so you know the ending. But Clara comes, and so Heidi goes back to see her grandfather because she just misses home so much. She feels like this is her home, and then Clara comes to visit and she learns to walk. Yeah, it's just a really lovely story with beautiful landscapes. It can be a little repetitive, and I think, you know, it's just the style of all the books to be a bit more descriptive and not as fast-paced as what we are nowadays, I think, used to. So I really highly recommend, if you liked the TV series as a kid, definitely read the book as well. Okay, so the next book that I read was A Year in Tokyo by Christy Jones, who has a YouTube channel and does beautiful content about reading, books, writing. She's a writer, obviously, and also she really had her YouTube channel when she spent a year in Tokyo with her partner. It was in 2017 when she was only 21, like the courage, I could never do that. And so it's a memoir and at the same time a guide which she illustrated herself. It's so beautiful to look at, really. It's just a book that you can just put in your bookshelf and then look at it and think, ah, I'd love to see this myself one day, maybe. The book is sort of structured in different chapters. She's talking about the time she spent there working as a teacher and also as a journalist. She wrote articles for a magazine and still being very, very busy, and also I think doing an online post-grad. She still managed to see quite a few things and gives you a lot of tips, places to see and shops to visit, and also places to see outside of Tokyo. But obviously the city is so enormous and huge that there are quite a few things to see in the city itself, and it's just, yeah, really lovely to hear about how she managed to sort of make her way and discover a completely different culture to what she is used to. She's from Australia. She definitely makes me want to go to Japan even more. I've always sort of wanted to go there, but never, like, it would be super expensive, but maybe one day. We'll see. So if you're looking or maybe planning to go to Japan and Tokyo in particular, you might like to pick this up. Definitely check out her YouTube channel because it's really, really lovely. And yeah. And the next book that I read, funnily enough, was also set in Tokyo. So next I read Stranger Than Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami. And this book has been on my TBR for quite some time, and I didn't pick it up until, well, recently. I love the cover. I think it's so fun and refreshing to have this bright yellow colour, and also love the photo on here. I don't know, it just spoke to me in a way. So it's about a woman, her name is Tsukiko. She's in her, I think, mid to like late 30s, and one day she's a rather, I wouldn't say necessarily lonely person, but she spends a lot of time on her own, and she one day meets her former teacher, Mr. Harutsuna Matsumoto. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of these names. And I'm looking down because actually she keeps on calling him sensei, which is, I think, just teacher. And they develop this very slowly develop this relationship, and then with time you don't only just meet at the bar but go for walks and even go on a trip together. Honestly, I'm not quite sure what to think or feel about this book. I liked reading it, and at the same time it really is hard to say, but I think I might read it again some other time because I like to read depending on my mood, and I think I probably wasn't in the right mood to read it. So I'd probably read it again because I feel I didn't read it like at the right time. I wasn't really in the mood for something as slow paced as this, but it definitely made me curious about the other books written by this author, so I may check it out sometime soon and I'd see if I like that. The next book I read was The World of All Creatures, Great and Small by written by James Steen. So this is a companion book to the new TV adaptation. As I said before, I recently discovered this new All Creatures, Great and Small adaptation and I really liked it. I watched it with my mum and we just absolutely love the characters and the beautiful landscapes, and it's just such a lovely, heartwarming story and really funny at times, especially with the two brothers, Siegfried and Tristan. So this book basically gives you a look behind the scenes. It explains how the idea for new TV adaptation came to life and how from this starting point, from this idea, the entire series was written and created, and so it gives you an insight and background information on the production, the set production, costume design, the hair and makeup, and all of the things that in the end make the series what it is. And I really liked it. I'm really interested in all of these creative processes that go into creating films and series. I think it's so interesting to see how many different people with different jobs come together to create something that is so appealing to an audience. And also very interesting to read about how they adapted the story, which is based on what I said before, the James Herriot novels. There are, I think, 8 of them. So how these were adapted for the new TV adaptation into something slightly more modern, in the sense that, for example, Helen, James's love interest, and also the housekeeper Mrs. Hall, have a very much more prominent role in this TV adaptation than in the 1970s, of course, because it has to appeal to a modern audience, and if there were no female characters, or like they were not in the just in the background, that would be kind of strange for us as an audience nowadays, I think. I think they really did a great job at that. I really love the characters. I love Helen. She's such an independent, strong woman. So it was really interesting to read about this creative process and how the actors, also there's a chapter with interviews with all the actors, so how they approached this, how they approached the characters that are so well loved and well known by so many people. So I highly recommend it if you like the series and if you're interested in film production. It was really insightful and interesting. The next book that I read was The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I really like the lettering on this book cover. I really like it because it's so simple and still very striking with its red, bold, bright colour. So I read this book because I have a little book club with 2 of my friends, so we're actually just 3, but it's lovely to get to read books together and talk about them afterwards. And as you can tell from the title, it's a crime fiction detective story, and Thursday Murder Club is basically a group of friends who, they are in their mid to late 70s, living in a rather luxurious retirement home, and they have this club called the Thursday Murder Club. So every Thursday night they meet to investigate unsolved murder cases. And this is because one of the friends was actually a police officer, and she somehow, it doesn't say in the book, but managed to get some old files of unsolved murder cases, and so they spend their Thursday nights trying to sort of find theories and investigate the material that they have at hand. But then one day, well, of course, there is a real murder, and they get to investigate more or less alongside the police officer, the detective inspector who's in charge, and his assistant Donna. And it's really funny in some ways because they, as elderly people, sometimes just use their sort of, oh well, they're elderly people, but they won't do anyone any harm, and they kind of just use that to get on with their investigation or trick some people into doing things. And there are lots of things they uncover, not only related to that murder but to other things that happened in the past. what I liked about this book is that it's not too brutal, like it's more about investigation. When I read crime fiction, which I rarely do, I prefer things like Agatha Christie, you know, when it's more about investigation and the story behind it, how it all led up to this one moment and what sort of pushed a person to commit a crime. And what I also really liked about this book is the friendship between these four elderly people who very much care for each other, and it was lovely to see, you know. I just makes you hope that if you are lucky enough to reach that age, you have friends like this who care for you. Yeah, so I really highly recommend it if you like sort of murder mystery detective stories, and if you want to laugh out loud, because there's some moments when you just really, it's hilarious sometimes, so I really highly recommend it. The next book I read was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. I'm not quite sure I'm pronouncing this right. So I love the book cover. It really reminds me a bit of like early 20th century sort of article Ross time. But unfortunately, so I read this book for Morgan Long's Patreon book club, but unfortunately I have to say I didn't really like it. It's not because it's bad, like it's, I think, rather well written, but I'm not a fan of fantasy. It's about this young woman. She's in her early 30s. She is a professor for fairy and all these fairy creatures, and she did a lot of research about it, and she is writing or like researching to make this encyclopedia. And so it's set in the early 20th century, although that is not really super important for the story. So in the beginning of the book, she sets for this journey to an island in the very north where it's really like cold, and it's just a very tiny little village. So what she basically wants to do is research on the kind of fairy that wasn't discovered or written about before. And she is very much an introvert, focusing on her work and doesn't want to be disturbed, and is not looking for much social interaction. And when one of her colleagues appears, Wendell Bumblebee, she's rather reluctant to have him participate in her research. And then lots of strange and also horrible things happen in the village, like fairies take away two of the children. And it's just, I like the descriptions of the landscape, I liked the writing, but fantasy is just not my genre. If you like fantasy and if you like these sort of mysterious creatures, maybe this is something for you. But I don't know, I used to really like fantasy when I was a teen, but I don't anymore. It's just not my thing. But it was definitely a rather fast pace read. It's well written in my opinion, it's just not my genre. But yeah, I think it's interesting to read things that you wouldn't from time to time, and the choice that was made in the book club just made me read something else for a change. And it's not a bad thing, it's just I know that I wouldn't pick up anything similar again. And the 12th book that I'm currently reading is The House Without Windows by Barbara Newhall Follett, which is a lost classic from the early 20th century written by a 12-year-old. And let me tell you, this is just unbelievable. I'm halfway through, I'm on page 110, and it's so beautifully written. It's sometimes a little repetitive, but honestly, like a 12-year-old wrote this is insane to me. Like, how is that even possible? I really marked quite a few passages. For example, I just love the writing. Butterflies like winged jewels. So it's really beautifully written, and also just like the cover, which is super beautiful. There are illustrations by Jackie Morris, and I can show you a few. For example, there is this kitten called Snowflake, and lots of illustrations in here, for example, of flowers and birds So it's really lovely to read, and also, yeah, but a rather slow paced book. Again, I feel like there were rather few slow paced books so far. So this book is about a girl named oh my god, I just really don't know how to pronounce her name, so I'm just going to say she to avoid pronouncing her name. So she decides to go away from home. It's not because her parents treat her badly, but she just feels this urge to live in the wilderness, to live surrounded by nature, and so she escapes from home and goes into the forest to live there. And of course her parents are very upset, and they try to catch her to bring her back home, but she manages to escape every single time. And it's just beautiful to see how she finds a way to live in nature like this on her own. And so far I really enjoy it. She currently is, so first in the beginning she is in the forest, then she feels this urge to reach the seaside, which she can see from afar, but she's never been there. And so now she lives on the seaside. I'm curious to see how this story is going to end. So she's ready to spend, I think, like 2 or 3 summers in the wilderness. Yeah, so if you're looking for something very slow paced, which is contemplative and about nature, I'd highly recommend this book. So these are all the books that I've read so far. I also like to read a bit of poetry, so I'm going to show you the books that I'm currently reading. There is Hope is a Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. So I recently read a few poems again. I just like to pick it up now and then and read a few poems, then put it back on my shelf and wait for another moment where I'm like, I'd like to read some poetry. I'm not going to read it from cover to cover, obviously, like it doesn't make much sense to me for poetry. I just like to dip into it from now and then. And so I think Emily Dickinson, she's a really well-known American poet from the 19th century, and I really like how she explores topics of nature and love and life. It's beautifully written. I love her style, so if you like poetry, I highly recommend Emily Dickinson. I also have a collection of Mary Oliver's poetry, Devotions. It contains poems from the 1960s through 2015, so it's a really wide range of poems that are included here, and I already, as you can see, marked some poems that I really like. It's about nature, it's about life, it's about so many different things, and I really like it so far. So again, this is a book that I just like to dip into from now and then and just randomly open a page and see if I'd like to read the poem. You know, I look at the title and like, oh, okay, I'm going to read this poem, and I just go through it and choose another one. So yeah, another great poetry collection in my opinion. Then there's also a poetry collection by Jen Campbell, The Girl Aquarium. I really love this cover. I think it's so interesting with the elephant that is underwater. I like the aesthetic of it. So this is by, as I said, Jen Campbell, and she has a YouTube channel, and I heard about this poetry collection through Christy Jones that I mentioned before. She's the author of one of the books I read this year, A Year in Tokyo. So through Christy Jones' channel, I discovered her channel and her poetry collection. And it is about, so Jane Campbell explores many different topics in her poetry, especially about body image and what beauty means in our society and to her. And I really like it so far. Sometimes I find it a little difficult to approach. I think it's because it's modern, obviously, and so far didn't read much modern poetry, so sometimes it's a little difficult for me to approach, but it's beautifully written, and reading it multiple times makes it easier to understand. I like the way she just writes and describes things. When she says she needs cleaning from all the ghosts that continue to sleep inside of her, I think it's beautifully written. So if you'd like to read some modern poetry, I'd highly recommend this one. And the last poetry collection I would like to mention that I found through Ruby Granger's YouTube channel. I think it was when she did her bookshelf tour that I saw this. It's a poem for every night of the year, edited by Ellie Azili, and look at this cover, it's so beautiful, I really like it. And so it's basically, as the title already says, a poem for every night of the year. So you have the date on top before you have the title and the author. And there are poems by William Wordsworth, John Keats, there are also sonnets by William Shakespeare, there is Edgar Allan Poe, there is Lewis Carroll, there is Coleridge, there is a lot of different authors in here, and also structured in a way that it sort of makes sense throughout the seasons. So you have poems more related to autumn in the autumn season, and spring related poems during the months of March. There is one, I only recently got this, so I didn't start from the very beginning, I only started in April, but I looked through the months of March and February, January as well, and there is one, for example, by Emily Dickinson. The 3rd of March is Dear March, Come In by Emily Dickinson. So it is really lovely to have a poem every night. It really also helps you actually to keep this habit of reading every single day, even if you just read a page in this case, but it's lovely, you know, it really keeps you reading. So these are all the books that I read this year so far that I'm still currently reading. I just very quickly want to mention the books that I'd like to read in the next couple of months, the books that I want to read this summer. So I made a little list in my notebook, and I have a stack of books here. I'm just going to go through them very quickly because I can't tell you much about them, obviously, because I haven't read them yet. But first there is It Shouldn't Happen to Us by James Herriot, which is just the second part in the James Herriot series. Then there is La Maison de Claudine by Follett, which is, I think, sort of semi-autobiographical. It is by Colette, this very famous French author from the 20th century, and it tells the story, I think, of her childhood. So I'm really curious to see. I never read anything by her, and I recently saw, maybe like a year or so ago, the film where Keira Knightley plays Colette, and so it got me interested in her work. Then there is La Péninsule aux 24 saisons. I have no idea if there is an English translation, by Inaba Mayumi, and it's about a woman who decides to go away from Tokyo and live in the countryside, and it's, I think, going to be a very lovely sort of slow-paced read. Then there is Tuesdays with Maury, that is, I think, rather well known. I heard from this again from Ruby Granger, and I saw this in my local bookstore, so I picked it up. Yeah, I think it's also a bit sad, so I'm not quite sure when I'll be in the mood to read it. But yeah, one of the books I have in my TBR, so maybe. Then there's also Anne of the Island by Ellen Montgomery. I read Anne of Green Gables only like 2 years ago for the first time, and then I read the second part in the series last year, and so I just slowly want to continue reading the series throughout the years, just when I feel like reading one of her stories, because I recently got this box set where I have the entire series. I didn't know there were like 8 books, so I have quite a bit of reading to do before I finish it, but it's fine. So I think everyone knows what this is about. I'm curious to see where Anne's journey is leading her, and also curious to see how the relationships with the other characters is going to develop. Then there is Hope in a Ballet Shoe by Michaela and Elaine de Prince, which is about Michaela de Prince, who was born in Sierra Leone and lost her parents. It's very tragic. I think at the beginning it said in the reviews that it's definitely not for children or even teenagers, because it's in the beginning very brutal. But basically she was adopted by a couple of Americans, and she discovers ballet and is now this prima ballerina. I think she, well actually I think she was dancing for a Dutch company and now she is in America again. So anyways, I recently started ballet classes too, so I'm really interested in the entire ballet world. I'd already heard about her and her story, doing a bit of research. I've been interested in ballet and dancing for a while, but only started like half a year ago to take classes myself. And I also, if you're interested in ballet and dancing, is a book that I read like 2 or 3 years ago, is Misty Copeland's biography, Life in Motion and Unlikely Ballerina. So I really like this one's really eye-opening, shocking, interesting. I'm really curious to see what her story is like and how it's maybe similar, one of the all. Very curious to see. Then next there is The Grass Hut by Truman Capote, which I think I bought like a year or 2 ago, so it's been sitting on my bookshelf for quite a bit and I'd like to read it this summer. This is actually a edition that has The Grass Hut and several other like short stories in it. Then I recently watched one of Christy and Jane's videos, which was about her favourite books that she read when she was a teen, and it really made me want to reread some books. And I picked up this book by Anne Bashers, I'm not quite sure I'm pronouncing this right, The Last Summer of You and Me, which I, back then when I was 14, read in German, Unser letzter Sommer. And so, as I'm not able to read in English, I wanted to read it in English, obviously, because it's the original language of this book. So it's about a summer spent in somewhere, I think on an island, and the main characters are 2 sisters. I remember it being a bit sad and tragic too. So I'm really curious to see if I like it now that I'm older. And then last but not least, actually the book I want to read next is Emma by Jane Austen. I'm just realising that it just fits my wall so well. I love this cover, it's so beautiful. It's a 200th anniversary annotated edition that I got from my mum a couple of years ago, so it's been sitting on my bookshelf for quite some time and I decided to read it now. I think though that I also listen to the audiobook because it's rather long, and sometimes I find it difficult to read books that are so old and the style is very different from what we are used to nowadays. But I'm really looking forward to reading this. I already read Pride and Prejudice, and then I also read Sense and Sensibility for unis. And so before I watch the film adaptations, I really want to read Emma, and I think it will fit sort of spring, early summer season really well. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. These are all the books that I'm planning on reading this summer, this like sort of spring, summertime. As I said before, I'm not the fastest of readers and I don't mind. Like I obviously would like to read more, but at the same time I feel like it's just okay. I read as much as I can and I try to pick books that I think I like. So that's what's most important, is to enjoy the time you spend reading. I just want to say you don't have to read like tons of books to enjoy reading. Just a reminder, I guess, for me too, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I'd like to read more, and some people like manage to read like what feels like 1,000 books a year, and I'm like, how do they do it? I don't know. So I really would be curious to know, are you a fast reader or more of a slow reader, and what sort of books are you currently reading? What is your favourite genre? Please let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!